My name is Justin, and I am a son of God and an addict and the host of the RICO 12 speaker meeting. And thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts, I am living the relative happy, joyous, and free life that is promised to those living in recovery and have been very active in the rooms of recovery since September of 2013. Welcome to the 125th meeting of RICO 12. RICO 12 is an organization with the mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addiction of all kinds and the similarities of recovery from all afflictions and addictions, and gaining and sharing tools and hope from others who are trudging this road. We are an open meeting for all, no matter your life experiences, faith traditions, nationality, or background. To learn more about RICO 12, please go to www.rico12.com. That's RACO12.com. And check us out. RICO 12 appreciates your help in keeping us working our 12th step and are grateful to receive donations to cover Zoom and podcast overhead costs. I will put the information and links in the chat of the live meeting and in the show notes of the podcast if you wish to contribute to this cause. If RICO 12 is a meaningful tool for you in your recovery walk, please consider rating and reviewing it in the podcast platform of your using. We look forward each week to receiving from the light reflected by our speakers from their higher power. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. I'm excited to hear from this week's speaker, Scott H. Today, he will be speaking to us on the topic of finally getting it after 40 years in the rooms. Now, here's a little bit about Scott H. He is from Pennsylvania and grew up in a family of 4 boys and a father who was gone most of the time. He was the youngest of 4 and began to get in trouble at a very young age. Smoked his first cigarette in the 3rd grade, then beer by 5th grade. Then graduated into much harder drugs and juvenile delinquency. Attended his first 12-step meeting in 1979 in the 9th grade inside Juvenile Hall. Had a huge spiritual religious experience at the age of 19, then later again at age 26 when he decided to become a youth pastor, working with troubled incarcerated youth and Youth for Christ. In spite of all that, he was able to quit drugs and alcohol, but could never seem to get past step 3. He is a blackout codependent. With 8 failed back surgeries, he became addicted to opiates and benzodiazepines. Today, he has gone through all 12 steps 4 times and continues to grow and trust God and the big book and his big book, the Bible, to celebrate recovery and lead others to his very own fellowship, the Joker's Wild, using the big book of AA for all addictions and afflictions, including codependency and love addiction. So I'll post the information on the Joker's Wild Fellowship in the chat and in the show notes of the podcast. Scott, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. So grateful to have this opportunity to share my experience, strength, and hope. Excuse the noise. I live on Main Street, so you may hear a few sirens and trucks driving by. But I grew up in quite a dysfunctional family, 4 boys. We were all about a year apart, a year and a half apart. My mom put him out pretty quick, and my dad was in the Navy, and he was gone quite a bit. And with me being the youngest in the family, I was always the child that was left out, and I think that's where I began to, well, I didn't see it then, but I began to see my codependency and people addiction begin. That seeking for validation and wanting to be a part of. My brothers would always, say, no, you can't go, and and leave me behind. So in my attempts to show up my older brothers, I would always try to go one step further than them. And that's what ended up getting me into trouble. Like I said, it's smoking cigarettes in the 3rd grade, drinking beer in 5th grade. I was doing all of that because I had older brothers who had been doing it already for years prior. But at that age, I didn't really recognize myself as an addict or an alcoholic. I just thought that I was a teenager out to have fun and get all the fun that I could. out of life. And that was kind of my main priority. And I think it was a mask that I was using to cover up the pain that was going on inside of me. I began to, like I said, drink beer, and then eventually weed. And then from there, it was literally anything and everything. And every time that I got in trouble, looking back now, there was always drugs and alcohol involved. That was one of the main factors of my trouble. Was there was always drugs and alcohol, or doing stupid things, trying to show up the next guy, trying to be better than. And that landed me in Juvenile Hall at age 15 for breaking into a pinball machine at the bowling alley. And that's where I had my very first experience with 12 steps. They had H&I come in there and talk to the children in there, or the juvenile delinquents. And I think the only reason I went to those meetings at the time was because they offered free cookies and Kool-Aid, and I got to get out of my cell. But that was the first time that I began to hear this message in this book, but it really didn't sink in, nor did I consider myself a real alcoholic at the time. I just considered myself someone who got caught. And I couldn't wait to get out and to continue my drinking and drugging. And then around age 19, I began to get into more and more trouble, and then ended up leaving the state, moving back to North Carolina, the Outer Banks. And I had a lot of time alone. And I remember walking through the dunes on the Outer Banks. They got these big dunes. And I wasn't raised in a religious family, but my grandmother was religious. I remember her taking us to Sunday school when I was like 3 and 4, but that was about the gist of it. My parents never took us to church, so there wasn't really a lot of understanding of God in my life. But those moments alone when I was in trouble, you call those foxhole prayers. God, if you just get me out of this one, I promise to change my life. And that was the first time that I, really, really desperately from inside my heart sought after God and asked that big question: who am I? What am I doing here? Where did I come from? And I ended up having my first child at the age of 19. And after I had my first child, I had to get a job. I had to pay the bills. I had to take care, and I had another kid a year later. So I'm not sure if I was a real alcoholic at that time, because I was easily able, with the spiritual experience I had on the beach, to put down the alcohol and the street drugs and all the illicit drugs. And I just quit, and I got a job and began supporting this new family that I had. And the book talks about different types of alcoholics. You might be a moderate drinker, you might be a hard drinker, or you might be, the type 3, the real alcoholic, who just cannot quit no matter how hard they exert themselves. And I continued going to 12-step meetings, though. I really enjoyed going to, I went to both fellowships, Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. And I spent a lot of time in the rooms, and I had several sponsors, but I never really made it past step 3. And one might ask, well, why didn't you just follow the instructions in the book? I was, I guess you could say I was young and dumb, but the best answer was I was lazy. I was a procrastinator. I didn't want to do the work, I just wanted to show up and go to meetings, and that's what I was being told in those meetings. Most of the meetings I went to were open discussion meetings. And all I was being told was, hey, stick around till the miracle happens, And today I learned that that's not enough. I got to do more. I got to have action. Simply going to meetings alone is not going to change Scott inside. I got to have action, and the action that is required is the solution, which is found in this book right here, these 164 pages. And it wasn't until the beginning of this year at the pandemic that I found 2 different programs online that taught the message the way the pioneers did. And that really excited me. There was something different about these 2 groups. One of them was Spiritual Gangsters, and another one was called Primary Purpose Group Recovered Codependents. And for some reason, I don't know if I had the gift of desperation at this point, and I had tried so many other things and failed up to this point. I was willing now to do the work. And that's what this book says that is required in the beginning, is willingness. I got to first recognize the problem, right? What's my problem? Everything I've tried has failed. Doctors, medications, self-help books, retreats, even church, going to church, volunteering in church. I volunteered myself to death in church. I was always the first one to sign up, and I was always working with children and kids, and so I really wasn't, drinking or using at this time, but I was still miserable. And like page 52 says, we were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were a prey to misery and depression, and we couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of usefulness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy, and we couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. Was not a basic solution of these bedevilments more important than whether we should see newsreels of lunar flight? Of course it was. So I knew something was missing. And, I hear a lot that everyone has this God-shaped hole in their heart, and I did have God, but the God that I had at the time, it wasn't working. It's for my recovery, that is. It was working for my relationship. I have a solid relationship. My higher power is Jesus Christ. But I still had all these bedevilments, right? I was still miserable. And this is someone that had been going to meetings for 40 years, in and out, in and out, in and out, like a revolving door. And so when I found these programs, I said, that's it. I'm finally going to both these programs, Spiritual Gangsters and PPG Recovered Codependents, both teach like the pioneers do, and they're very heavy on sponsorship. They're very heavy on the solution and the big book and working the steps, not just simply talking about the steps. not simply just learning the steps. This book tells me that head knowledge avails me nothing, and I had plenty of head knowledge. I knew this book backwards and forwards, inside and out, yet I still had all these bedevilments. So I worked the 12 steps with PPG and spiritual gangsters 4 different times. Why did I do them 4 different times? I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm an overachiever. Maybe that's part of my validation addiction. By the way, I never heard that word slaw or validation addiction until I joined spiritual gangsters. I didn't know that even existed. I didn't know that one could be addicted to a person or validation. And I began to learn just like all these new radical stuff, and it kind of blew my mind, and here I'm coming from a person who had been to many different, universities, degrees, thinking I know everything. And now after working the steps, I find out that that's the problem. Scott, you are the problem. It's self. Self is the problem. And my ego was getting in the way. I was playing God. This book tells me that I can't play God. God is either everything or he's nothing. And until I, get Scott out of the driver's seat and put Scott in the back seat and put my higher power in the driver's seat, nothing's going to happen for me. I'm going to be stuck in the problem. And that's where I was. I was stuck in the problem. Stuck, some say step 1, stuck at step 1. Some say stuck at step 0. And that's where I was. And I vigorously worked the steps. The first time I worked the 12 steps, I completed them in 2 weeks. And this is some guy that went to the meetings for 40 years. And the type of meetings I was going to, you'd run into people that had been there 2 or 3 years, and they would tell you, oh, I'm on step 4 still, and that's just the type of meetings I was going to. A friend of mine, Cameron, jokes, he calls them open disgusting meetings. You go to these meetings and you feel like you need another meeting after this meeting. When I changed my program and began working with others who have recovered, who have been living in the solution, not in these bedevilments, right? They were getting victory, and they were living the happy, joyous, and free. And this program is truly a program of attraction, not promotion. And I could see that these people were the real deal, that there was something different about them. Speaking of spiritual gangsters and primary purpose group. And I believe a lot that had to do with it was that they practiced the program the way the pioneers did. They practiced all 12 steps, got you through the steps quickly, and then got you into working with others quickly, sponsoring others, helping others. That's something that I've never done. I went to meetings for 40 years and never sponsored a person. I'm ashamed today to say that, but that's my story. This book says that my deepest, darkest, ugliest past is now my greatest asset, because I can use my story to help others that may be struggling, that may be saying to themselves, why am I not getting this change? Why do I feel like a failure still? Why do I feel like I have trouble with personal relationships every day? Why can't I control my emotional natures? Why am I a prey to misery? You know, well, it's because I'm not working this program. I was working Scott's program. I certainly wasn't working the program that was written in the first 164 pages of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm a very staunch historian. I'm very big on doing it the way that the original authors and pioneers did it, those first 100. I wanted, if someone wrote a book, I want to do it exactly like they did, right? I don't want to do it like someone 80 years later is doing it, because all the meetings I was going to, I never heard this stuff before. I never heard this stuff that Spiritual Gangsters was saying, you know? And when I got a sponsor, began to follow solutions, began to work the steps, not just talk about the steps, and then do my first step 4. You know, I always heard that ominous, ooh, wait till you get to step 4. That's all I heard for 40 years. Oh my gosh, step 4 is such a bear. You know, and for me, when I finally got done my inventory, it was so freeing. It was such a freeing experience. I felt like a weight had lifted off my shoulders, you know, very similar to Pilgrim's Progress, where he felt that bundle he was carrying around just drop and fall off of him when he surrendered his life, Pilgrim. And that's what happened. I began to see now what was the root causes and conditions in Scott's life by doing an inventory. And by doing an inventory, I'm looking at my assets and my liabilities. I'm taking a commercial stock inventory, and I need to see the things that I need to get rid of, right? The things that are no good for Scott. Another thing that PPG was the first one I did the 12 steps with, taught me, was to change the word drinking to thinking. So whenever I read this book, whenever I come across the word drink or drinking, I draw a line through it and I write the word think or thinking above it. And wherever I see a pronoun, he, her, shim, them, she, put your name there. And that's what I did. So now when I read this book, I put my name in there. And I put the problem as thinking, because this book tells me, you know, on pages 23, 24, 25, that the problem centers where? Right here, in my mind. So it doesn't matter what program I'm in. This program will work for Overeaters Anonymous, gamblers, sex, love addiction, narcotic addiction, alcoholic addiction, simply by substituting terms and words in the book. And when I read the book this time, doing that way, by putting my name in there, by changing the word drink to thinking, or acting out codependently. Whenever I saw alcoholism, I changed it to chronic codependency. When I read the book, it was like a epiphany had happened. It was like my eyes were open, like scales had literally fallen from my eyes, and I was able to see for the first time. And in steps 6 and 7, you know, I asked God to take these things away. Now I'm ready. I made a decision to have God to cast these things off of me, these things that serve me no use or no purpose. And then steps 8 and 9, I've already made my list in step 4. That was quite simple. And then I have to go out and begin to make a decision and become willing to make the amends. Does that mean I'm going to make all my amends in the first 2 weeks? No. But I must at least become willing to make the amends. Some amends might take years, because this book says to make direct amends. And then the next steps, I think, are the steps that really are the ones that are the lifesaver for the addict, the alcoholic, the gambler, the overeater, 10, 11, and 12. These are the maintenance steps. These are the steps that keep us sane if we do them. Well, remember, if we do them, because if we let up on our program, right, and we say, I'm going to take a break today. Yes, that person effed me off, but I don't really need to do a step 10 on that, do I? I don't need my nightly review tonight. I think I'll watch Netflix instead. When I do that, I slip back into old behaviors. That is the perfect picture of recovery, is getting rid of your old ways of thinking and acting out. And the only way that we can do that is by waking up in steps 1, 2, and 3, and then living in steps 10, 11, and 12 every day. And if we do that, theoretically, we're working all 12 steps every day. Every day. I have to wake up and say, hey, I'm powerless. And then I have to ask God for the power. I have to begin to become willing to seek the power. Let's say if I was once an atheist or agnostic, I have to at least become willing to seek the power, right? Because many of my sponsees, they stumble on steps 2 and 3 with the whole spirituality or God thing. And I explained to them that, well, you simply have to become willing to seek the power. And I believe if you follow the instructions laid out in this book uses explicit words, clear-cut instructions, precisely. If I do what this first 164 pages says, with clear-cut instructions, precisely, then and only then will I begin to get out of these bedevilments. Then will I begin to see the promises begin to come true for me, right? Because isn't that what we all want? We don't want to feel alone. We want people to like us, right? And that's where I have to have balance in my life, because now today I have to question and seek guidance from God for everything. Scott, are you doing this because you want validation? Scott, are you doing this because you want to appear like you're a know-it-all? Or are you doing it from the bottom of your heart because you really love and care about people, and you want to serve other people, and you want to see others get well? This book says nothing quite so much as ensures immunity from drinking, thinking, acting out, gambling, sex, pornography, whatever, as working with others. And that is what has changed for me this year, working with others. How could it doesn't say anything about recovery there either. It says working with others. I can help my neighbor. I can go volunteer at the YMCA. I can go to the homeless shelter. I can pick up the telephone and call someone who needs outreach. I can sponsor others now and take them through the steps the way that I was taken through, and not get offended if my sponsees don't do the work. That's not my job. If my sponsees don't do the work, I can empathize with them. I understand them because I was one of them. I was one of those guys who dragged his feet and did nothing except, I don't want to say nothing. I went to meetings, I read, I had sponsors, but I didn't do this program. And that's the difference. This is not a program of osmosis. You simply are not going to get it just by showing up. We have to get into action, like this book says, into action and more action. And do I get a day off? I've already learned the hard way. No, I don't get a day off. This is a way of life. This book is a design for living. It's not about quitting drinking, drugs, alcohol, sex, even though it may appear that way, right? This book is a design for how to live my life happy, joyous, and free, and not be a misery to prey, not be stuck in depression, not be carrying around resentments, right? Not being angry at people. Am I perfect? No. But I now I know what to do when I get a resentment, when I slip. I do a step 10 immediately, promptly, right away. I can't wait. I can't go to sleep on that resentment. Otherwise, that resentment is going to turn into Mount Olympia. And then every little person around me for the next week until I fix this, I'm going to find myself exploding and slipping backwards. So if I simply follow the instructions in this book, like Cameron says, like a recipe, like baking a cake, without changing the ingredients, then I'm going to get the desired result. But the other is true too. If I do the opposite of what's in this book, I get the bedevilments. That's what I'm going to get. And I can say that from personal experience and strength, not because I read a book, not because I've been around for, 40, 45 years. It's because I've done it the wrong way for 40 years. It's funny, but it's not funny because there's people dying out there. And we have the answer. It's our job to go out there and share and take this message and to pass it on. That's what the pioneers did. That was the only thing that kept the pioneers sober, was passing this on and delivering this message of hope. And with that, I guess it's 1:33. I'm sorry I went over 3 minutes, Justin.
We're good. Thank you so much, Scott. Good stuff. I really appreciate your share, your experience, strength, and hope in that. I definitely got a lot out of it, and we've got some questions that have come in. I've got some questions that I've written down, and I want to start off with a question for you that came to me as you were sharing something about your higher power. You had found your higher power. Your God was sufficient for you for your relationship, but not for recovery. And you talked about that you wore yourself out in the service of God, volunteering yourself to death in church, basically, and yet recovery wasn't happening. The bedevilments were still there. What changed? How did that relationship change specifically between the God that was good for relationships but not for recovery and the God that is good for both maybe now? How does that look now?
That's a great question. Like I said, for the first 40 some years, I didn't think there was a difference. Anytime someone would bring steps 1, 2, and 3 for me, I'd say, oh, that's not a problem for me. I'm a pastor. I teach the Bible. But I was still living in the bedevilments. So I had to really re-examine my walk with my higher power. Was I truly, truly trusting my higher power? And was I seeking my higher power's guidance? Or was I seeking Scott's guidance? And that's the problem. Even though, yes, I had a higher power and a close walk with God, I was still living in the bedevilments. I was seeking Scott's. I hope that makes sense. There is a difference.
Turbo is fully charged.
Yeah, can you think of a time or a moment where that shifted, where all of a sudden you went, oh, the light came on, and that shift from I've got a God who is sufficient, but obviously not, because I'm still not recovered, and now, oh, I've got a God that I can really trust in this.
It shifted when I finished the 12 steps and I began working with others. When I began working and sponsoring others, that's when I was able to see me. When I was working with my sponsees and seeing them struggle, I was basically seeing me and helping others get through steps 2 and 3. I was able to see that this is not an event, this is a process, and that I don't need to look for external things for my higher power. My God is inside of me. Where did I find him? Like the spiritual experience says, deep down inside, deep down inside. So faith without works is dead. Perhaps I had the faith part, but I didn't have the works part down.
Very interesting. I love how you brought that there to that. That makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you for sharing that. We have a question that came in from Pete. Pete says and asks, identification is critical to newcomers being drawn to the recovery message in 12-step fellowships. How does your fellowship, Spiritual Gangsters, PPG, handle this critical requirement with newcomers, since their point of identification could be anything from drug addiction, gambling, food, codependency, etc.?
That's a great question, and you're going to hear several different answers depending on who you're asking this question. But for me, I would agree that if a gambler were to come to me and say, hey, Scott, can you take me through the steps? Can you qualify and identify with me? Am I going to be able to win the confidence of a gambler or an overeater within an hour, like this book says, if that's not my problem? For me, I try to seek out sponsees that have the same afflictions or addictions that I have. Does that mean that I can't work with a gambler and show them the steps? If I get a debtor or a Debtors Anonymous gambler, something that I don't really struggle with, perhaps I might ask them to go to some of those meetings and to begin taking down numbers of other people who are struggling with that same addiction, because that qualification and that identification is very important, especially in the first phone call, the first 1 or 2 phone calls or meetings, because this book says we can usually win the confidence of the other alcoholic, gambler, overeater, addict, whatever, within an hour or so. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that's something that I also think about a lot. With the RICO 12 program, no, we aren't a fellowship per se. We don't have sponsors that sponsor through here or anything like that. It's just a speaker meeting platform for all addicts and of all backgrounds. And sometimes I wonder, and I've been asked to speak in a fellowship that I don't qualify for personally, but I get I understand that the solution is the same, but still it's so hard to identify with. And I feel like an imposter in those areas, but really grateful that the solution is the same. At least my understanding of the solution is the same, no matter my addiction or affliction. So,
oh, absolutely. The chapter, it says there is a solution. So this solution can work for any addiction or affliction simply by substituting the words or the terms.
Yeah. Yeah, my big book has got all those crossed out things with, it substitutes for drinking and putting in thinking and everything else. So that's good. I've got another question for you here, Scott. You mentioned stuck at step 1 or step 0. Now you talk about you were in the rooms for 40 years. What did that feel like when you realized and were probably shown fairly forcefully, hey, you're still stuck at step 1, step 0 after 40 years. How did that feel to your ego at that time? And how did you overcome that?
To be quite honest, I think I was the one that was asking, come on, somebody tell me, how do you work these 12 steps? And I don't know if it was the meetings that I was going to, but nobody was able to set me down and simplify it and show me that working these 12 steps should not take a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. I can work the steps with someone in a week to 10 days, but I have an entire lifetime to practice them, to live them out. So yeah, I felt befuddled. I felt like kind of ripped off, like, stick around till the miracle happens. I'm like, that's all I'm doing is sticking around. Why don't somebody, pull me aside? And I tried it the NA way with their 1,000 and so questions, answering questions. And, I've tried it with other, the 12 and 12 didn't work for me. It wasn't until I went through the big book the way the pioneers did, and I worked the program the way that the pioneers did, that it happened for me.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I really can relate to that. How over those 40 years, when newcomers would come into meetings you were attending and they're like, oh, you've been in here for 40 years? And people are talking so much about this step 4. What does that look like to you? How did you respond to them in those instances as an old timer in their eyes?
Well, first of all, let me clarify. I wasn't in the rooms for 40 years straight. There were periods of my life where I was not going to 12-step meetings because I was a pastor. So I was using my church kind of as my recovery solution. So I wasn't sitting in AA and NA meetings for 40 years straight. I was more of the revolving door type, going out and coming back in. And if you know of any 12-step program, if you're a newcomer and you walk in that door, they jump on you pretty quickly. So I felt like the constant newcomer. Maybe I should write a book, The Constant Newcomer.
The constant newcomer, lessons learned by coming through the revolving door, huh?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, we've got a question that came in from an anonymous attendee. The question is, you mentioned the word pioneer. What does that term mean specifically, and how can I approach my recovery like a pioneer? I've done the 12 steps, and I'm doing steps 10 through 12 right now.
Well, there's a lot of historical background that a lot of people really don't. I didn't even learn until I started asking some of the archivists and the historians and reading the older AA books like Pass It On, Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, asking the archivists at the Akron office to send me the pamphlets that they used between 1935 and 1946. And it was quite different than today's recovery. For example, back then, the sponsor did the inventory. The sponsor would come to your house with the paper and pencil and ask you the questions and fill them out. Because we have to remember that back then, these guys weren't waiting 6 months, a year to work the 12 steps. They were getting through them quickly. There was only 2 meetings back then. There was a newcomers meeting on Friday night, and then there was the closed meeting on Tuesday night. You couldn't even get into the closed meeting unless you had your AA membership card. And the only way that you would become a card-carrying member of Alcoholics Anonymous is that you went through the 12 steps. Well, where did you go through the 12 steps? At the newcomer meeting. And in the newcomer meeting, they basically had 4 rooms in the back. And they would take you through these 4 rooms. And it's kind of funny, 12 steps in 4 hours. But yeah, you would get through the steps rather briefly, quickly. And then you would go to the closed meetings and get out. And you might be out working with other addicts, alcoholics on day 3, 4, 5. I mean, a lot of people say, well, I'm not ready to sponsor yet. I'm not qualified. I felt the same way on my first sponsee call. But no, when these guys were getting frisky, they were picking up the telephone and going to the drunk wards. They were going out into the bars and literally bringing alcoholics into their home and living with them, bringing them into their home. So it was definitely done quite differently. And then on the amends portion, the sponsor was the one that drove you around to do your amends. It looks differently today. I don't see it happening that way today, but the reason the sponsor would drive the sponsee to do the amends is because what happens if the door gets slammed in your face? Where are you going to head on your way home? We're talking about dealing with people who had just quit. They just quit drink. Maybe they're still jittery. This book even says that. Though you may be still jittery with this book in your hand, you can easily duplicate what we have done. So that is all it is needed, is God, the 12 steps in this book, and a recovered sponsor to take you through this program.
Love it. And thanks for going into that. The pioneers, those that first started the movement, Bill W., Dr. Bob, and that whole crew there, there's some amazing history there and some amazing insights. And thank you for sharing some of those things. Good stuff. All right. Another question from Sharon. Sharon says, thanks, Scott. As someone who is in and out, I know the big book is the solution. Did you feel you didn't connect with the right sponsor before Spiritual Gangsters or something else? Sharon says, I'm on step 4 now and kind of procrastinating. I know I need to get into action. Thoughts on that?
That's probably the worst step to get stuck on. Where have I lost my sponsees at? Usually step 4 and step 9. And the reason why you want to get through, my sponsors give me a timeline. So when they send me those sheets to fill out, they tell me, I'm going to be calling you in 5 days, and we're going to be doing everything that you've written down on these sheets in 5 days. They give me a timeline. So that was something that PPG does differently. They actually give you an expected date, a time. Otherwise, us addicts and alcoholics, we are lazy. I mean, it's in our human nature. If we think we can sit around for months, and the inventories for us, and it's important that we get through it quickly. Otherwise, we use it to beat ourselves up. It's not to relive. We don't want to relive this stuff over and over and over again. We want to get the inventory done the same way, like if you were a grocery clerk at a grocery aisle. You wouldn't want to leave bad yogurt on the aisle for a week and then have someone go in and buy it and get sick. We have to do the inventory. We get it done quickly, and then we get into 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and get this stuff cast out.
Yeah, love it. All right, I have one more question, then we'll wrap this up. My question comes from your share earlier. You talked about, and the big book talks about this, how our past can become our greatest strength, our greatest resource there. Do you have a specific incident that you're comfortable sharing in which your past helped somebody else really gain some traction? You sharing your past became a something of strength to you and to somebody else.
Oh, absolutely. I named one of them in my share, resentment. Resentment. The resentment is the number one offender. I cannot afford to be angry at anybody. Yet, in the amount of time that I went through the 12 steps 4 different times, I found myself slipping backwards because I was letting up on my program of action. I wasn't doing my 10, 11, and 12s every night. And I began to get either resentful, or I began to get hurt by things that people did, or I would make up imaginary stuff in my head that just wasn't real. So that's why it is so important that we follow. These words are not here for us just to read. The spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. We live this. So that is why it's so important to not stay so long on step 4. And I'm sorry, I'm getting the questions mixed up. Yeah, I would say resentments. I don't have time to be angry at people today. And how have I learned? By being angry at people.
Love it. Love it. And that concept of my past being my greatest asset has it was really counterintuitive to me when I first came into the rooms. I wanted to bury the past and never look back at it again and be done with it, wash my hands of it and walk away. But that's just not helpful to me. Every time I've tried to do that throughout my whole life, it grows back up in the backyard. I'm burying it in the backyard. I plant grass over the top, and those fungus just grow right back up and become worse and worse every time. I've got to own it and work with it. So good. Yeah. All right. Before we get closed out here, Scott, do you have any final words of wisdom for us?
I would just have to simply say, like Dr. Bob said, keep it simple, take it easy, but do it. We got to do it. We have to live this program. It is a daily program. It's 24 hours a day. Now, if those 24 hours begin ending up looking like me doing nothing every 24 hours, a bunch of nothings, then that's like my check engine light going on in my car. I got to pull the car over. I got to take a look and see, why is Scott behaving this way? Why is Scott getting angry, hurt, sad, upset? I got to pay attention to those check engine lights that come on in my life. And I have to be, and if I slip, it's okay. I pick myself up and I get back into the basics of this program. Fundamentals.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I really appreciate that. Thank you, everybody who's here. That was a great RICO 12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. Please consider joining our WhatsApp group and participate in our community there, asking questions, answering others' questions that may come up. If you have not yet rated and reviewed the podcast in Apple Podcasts, please go do so now. It's a great way to work your 12th step and helping us work our 12th step and sharing this message with others. I invite the audience to come back next week when we'll be hearing from Herb K., sober in AA since 1984. He's an author of 3 recovery books and an international speaker, and we are really excited to have him here with us next week. His topic will be the best kept secret, not cured, and daily reprieve. Now let's launch off into the rest of our day with the Step 11 prayer, the prayer of St. Francis that Scott will say for us.
Can I put a quick plug in for today's meeting?
Absolutely.
At 4 o'clock Eastern, we are privileged to have one of the greatest historians, Britt S. I'm not going to mention who her husband is, but if you did some research, you can find out. But she is going to be speaking at the Joker's Wild from 4 to 6. The subject is trauma, not a reason to relapse.
Yeah, and I put the link in for Joker's Wild in the chat here. And for those who are able to listen to this podcast here in the next couple of hours, I'll have it posted within 45 minutes of now. You can get the link to that also in there. So excellent. Thank you, Scott. And Step 11 prayer.
Okay, let me grab it. Let's have a moment of silence for both the sick and suffering in and out of these rooms, followed by the Step 11 prayer. We'll take that moment now. Lord, make me a channel of thy peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony, that where there is error, I may bring truth, that where there is doubt, I may bring faith, that where there is despair, I may bring hope, that where there are shadows, I may bring light, and that where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Lord, grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds, for it is by forgiving that one is forgiven, and for it is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. Amen. Thank you.
Amen. Keep coming back, everybody. Come trudge this happy road with me. Work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching for glimmers of